Allison Yun-Tzu Lin from Japan. She's a climate activist of LCOY Japan and Climate Youth Japan, CYJ. So Allison is a climate justice activist working as the international outreach lead for Fridays for Future Japan and Climate Youth Japan. She has experience in researching, lobbying, and striking to engage the Japanese public and government in more ambitious climate change countermeasures. So let us now welcome Allison to share her stories. Allison, please.
Thank you, Natalie, for the introduction. I'll start sharing my screen. Wait. Okay. So thank you for the introduction. I'm Allison from Japan, and I will be talking about some regional action going on in Japan. So I will be getting started right away by starting to talk about the effects of climate change in Japan. So Japan is highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. As you can see here, the typhoons, floods from heavy rains, and extreme heat is something Japan is very vulnerable to. In the past few years, these disasters have become much more frequent and intense. This is footage of Typhoon Hagibis in October 2019, which flooded 74,000 homes, placed 7 million people under evacuation order, and caused 15 billion USD in damage. And the temperatures in Japan have consistently been rising, causing very extreme heat and lots of people being hospitalized due to heat-related illnesses. So climate injustice is that idea that these worst impacts of climate change that I've described are suffered by the most underprivileged and vulnerable members of society, even though they contribute the least to carbon emissions. Globally, this also means that low-income countries suffer the most without the ability to properly mitigate and adapt. As a high-income country, I believe that Japan has both the ability and responsibility to push for these strong climate policies to counter the worst effects of climate change. After all, when you have a bathtub that's overflowing with water, you don't keep mopping up the water, you try to turn off the tap. This is a similar analogy we can use for climate change. As extreme weather patterns intensify, the only real solution we have is to tackle the underlying cause of global warming. However, this is far from the case in Japan. Japan's climate policies have long ignored the damage of climate change and rely heavily on fossil fuels. In fact, coal, oil, and gas is projected for about 50% of the energy mix by 2030. Currently, Japan is still planning on building around 22 coal-burning power plants around the country in the next 5 years. It has also been criticized, Japan's climate policies have been criticized as being highly inefficient by many different scientists, such as the Climate Action Tracker, a think tank. And it predicts that if every country had similar policies as Japan, then global warming would reach perhaps 4 degrees. In Japan, though, young people have been a small but insistent force to demand political action for climate change. In particular, I want to talk about the work of one climate organization that I work with, which is Fridays for Future Japan. Fridays for Future Japan, or FFF Japan, seeks to mobilize the public and the government to reduce carbon emissions enough to align with the Paris Agreement, limit warming to 1.5 degrees. I like to think of our efforts, which is some geared towards the public and some geared towards the government, as rolling a snowball. Hopefully they'll build onto each other until become an unstoppable force. Most of you probably know about Fridays for Future climate strikes, which is started by Greta Thunberg in Sweden. So it's where students strike school to protest in the streets for the climate. In March 2019, FFF Japan had its first global climate march with about 300 people in 2 cities. By September, however, the next global climate march, we had 5,000 people marching in 27 locations across Japan. On a personal note, that was also my personal first strike. You can see me in the bottom right picture. I was completely awed by the dedication and passion of the people around me, so I started organizing in my own city, which is Kobe. Since then, this is the locations in the September climate strike. Since then, within Kobe, we've organized our own climate marches. And then as COVID happened, we had online climate strikes. And we even had the phrase Kiko mo Kiki, or the climate is also in a crisis, reach number 8, trending on Japanese Twitter. Last month, we carried out our own socially distanced climate shoe strikes with about 4,000 participants from around Japan. So I like to see these climate strikes as just an indicator of public opinion in Japan. Overall, we tried to mobilize, try to awaken public consciousness through different campaigns by engaging with more well-known public figures in Japan, carrying out petition campaigns on change.org, launching our own social media, and collaborating with businesses like Keen and Patagonia who are empathetic with our goals to further awaken public consciousness. So after all, these are all a means to an end, I believe, which is to give the youth a platform to voice their opinions on what climate action is necessary. This work has propelled us into direct conversation with the government. These are some other local actions we've done locally in FF Kobe. But ultimately, the goal is for us to be able to talk directly with the government and issue our demands for what we believe climate action should be like. So this is where we had opinion exchange meetings where we directly asked the government, our city council, to declare a climate emergency. And it is Fridays for Future Japan. After we launch our petition campaign online, we sought to deliver it directly to the government and for them to adopt it. So one indicator of the effects we've had is that about a year ago today, only 2 municipalities in Japan had declared climate emergencies and made stricter carbon emission reduction targets, but about this month, that number has increased to 50 due to lobbying by different Fridays for Future chapters in Japan, as well as different climate organizations. So the expectation is that a vaccine will hopefully be developed in the next few months. As we return to pre-pandemic levels of industrial activity, I think the concept of a green recovery is more important than ever. The decisions that the government make will have long-lasting effects about which industries to invest in will have long-lasting effects on our future. Also, there are so many parallels that can be drawn between our response to the pandemic and the topic of climate justice. Even though a crisis can affect everyone, it is the most vulnerable members in our society who face the worst effects. So recently, the Japanese government, like Faye mentioned about China, has declared that it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050, which is belated but a very good first step. Fridays for Future Japan will, of course, and all other youth organizations and climate organizations will work to make sure that this isn't just, like Faye said, a faraway goal, but that they're taking concrete steps right now to phase out coal and introduce renewables on a large scale.
Thank you so much for sharing, Allison. Please finish this graphic and then we can move on.
So lastly, I think because we're at LCOY, the local conference of youth, I wanted to share what I think are the key strengths and drawbacks of advocating for climate justice as a young person. So the good part is at our age, we have the moral authority on this issue. We haven't contributed to the policies that are polluting our world and the polluting industries and polluting policies. We can unapologetically demand the right to a sustainable, just, and livable future. There's a set of challenges that come along with that as well, which is the fact that we'll almost always be underestimated. So we have to come prepared to make sure we know what the science behind what we're talking about, and to make sure we're always advocating for a just future. So thank you, and here are some citations. Thank you.